OPB Podcasts.
From the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Thursday, September 25th. Portland Mayor Keith Wilson sailed into City Hall this year on the back of an ambitious pledge to end unsheltered homelessness, but that plan relies heavily on swiftly opening a bunch of overnight-only shelters across town. We are now 9 months into Wilson's term and quickly approaching his self-imposed deadline to get everyone off the streets. So let's check in on the system and its progress. This week, my colleague Alex Zielinski visited one of the overnight shelters to see how they operate and talk to some of the people choosing to stay there. Today, we're going to hear about what she saw and heard and check in on the rest of Wilson's plan. Spoiler, it's not all good news. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk Vanderhart.
And I'm Alex Zielinski. I cover Portland city government for OPB.
Alex, it is hard to overstate how much we've talked about Keith Wilson's plan to end homelessness on the podcast, but that's because it is ambitious. It's big news. We want to see if he can do it. And it's been a while. So just remind us quickly how the mayor intends to solve unsheltered homelessness by December 1st.
Yeah, let's see how quickly I can get this in. So Wilson entered office, like you said, with a promise to end unsheltered homelessness by the end of the year. He then scooted that deadline to December 1st for some unknown reason, which is like, okay, good luck. Unsheltered homelessness, the term is a bit of a fuzzy phrase that's defined differently by different people, but I think it's important to kind of nail down. To Wilson, it's anyone sleeping outside of a building with walls. So people sleeping in a tent, in a car, an RV, or just outside. It's not people who can be technically described as homeless who are staying in a shelter or crashing at a friend's house, something like that. Okay, so to reach his goal, Wilson's plan relies on quickly standing up a bunch of emergency overnight shelters across the city, like you mentioned. These are spaces set up like an emergency shelter that pops up during cold weather or hot weather, a bunch of cots spread out in rows in a big room. And they're only open at night from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. And Wilson's mission since entering office in January is to open 1,500 beds by December 1st.
Yep, he gets started in January. We are recording this, as I said, September 25th. We have a little more than a month until this date. Where are we in getting to this goal?
We had a couple months. We are less than halfway. Last I checked, the city has opened 5 shelters that can accommodate a little over 600 beds.
You're right. Sorry. December 1st. I was thinking November 1st.
Yeah,
we got a couple months. All right. So, these shelters have opened, but I don't think there's been a real visible sort of view into how they run, right?
Sure.
It's been kind of closed off to the media. We don't get a good idea of what's going on in those doors. You got a good look this week at what it actually looks like. Mm-hmm. Help us understand. Paint us a picture.
Yeah, so Tuesday night, I went to the Salvation Army Female Emergency Shelter, which goes by the acronym SAFES, and it's for any female identifying adult. It's located downtown on the west side of the Burnside Bridge on 2nd Avenue, close to Voodoo Donut, really close to actually at the old Portland Mercury building where we once were employed.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, this building has 100 cots spread out over 3 stories, all in open rooms, rows of beds, no storage for people's stuff. They have to kind of jam their bags underneath their beds when they sleep. It's first come, first serve, but if you stayed there one night, you have a guaranteed spot the following night. This hasn't been too much of a problem. The Salvation Army staff told me that on average, around 40 of their beds are filled every night, so less than half. There's no meal offered. There are some snacks like granola bars and beef jerky that you can get when you come in. And they also have showers that you can sign up for. When I was there, some people went straight to bed and others hung out a little bit. There's a common area where there's like some games and puzzles, and there was a TV playing. For some reason, the DVD features of Raiders of the Lost Ark. People were really into that, the commentary. But most people are kind of keeping to themselves, checking in, checking out. Doors open at 8 p.m., like I said. Lights out are at 10. Lights come back on at 5 a.m. and everyone must be out by 6.
You and I were talking before you did this visit, and we were talking about the possibility that you would get a curated view of this. Like,
sure,
you would be kept on a short leash. Maybe you'd be allowed to talk to some residents that were doing really well or very favorable about these services, but not get a true picture. Mm-hmm. How did that work out? Did you feel like you got a realistic view of what was going on?
Yeah, I will start by noting that the Salvation Army staff appeared a little more nervous about me being there than anticipated, probably because a story came out earlier that day by the Oregonian about another shelter they currently run up in Northeast Portland that didn't have its staff trained up in adequate health and safety protocols, and there were reports of a bed bug infestation. So they were very explicit to me in pointing out, here, this is the room with the kit where we deal with the bed bug infestations. This is kind of the training that we've been doing. Yep. But they didn't have like hand-picked people for me to interview. I had pretty free range to kind of mill about and chat with kind of whoever. I'll give them credit for that.
Yeah.
It was, very tidy and clean. And who knows what it looks like any other night of the week. I'm sure they were a little bit more thoughtful about getting it all set up. Who knows? But I started the night outside talking to women who had lined up at 7 p.m. to get into the shelter when the doors opened at 8. And I heard some complaints from folks, people who had, had their property stolen by other people when they'd been sleeping there, people who felt like staff could do more to help them in the long term, that they felt treated a little bit like cattle being moved in and moved out with much regard every day. But I also heard appreciation. One of the people I talked with was a woman named Alex Rabas. She's been coming to the same shelter for about 6 weeks. And here's what she told me.
I think it works for a lot of people because they don't force you into a program. It's like it meets you right where you're at. And literally just the consistency of having a place to come to every night that's safe, a safe bed. Mm-hmm. I find myself I can't wait to get to my bed.
And I heard the same thing from a number of people I spoke with, women who had had bad experiences maybe in other shelters and are just grateful for somewhere to sleep indoors.
Yeah.
That the alternative really is outside or not sleeping. And kind of I asked folks, okay, if you aren't here, where are you? And the majority of people that I spoke with said, we're just walking around at night. We do not feel safe sleeping. We sleep during the day if we can, or we try to find a group of people who are up who can keep an eye on us while we sleep. So it's a place for them to kind of let their guard down a little bit.
Feel a little more relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
That woman you spoke with, Alex, she said, we're not forced to participate in programs here. This is a place we can rest. That's a positive thing for her, it sounds like. What expectations are there in place in these shelters? Are they getting connected with the services at all? Is it just, as you mentioned, cattle? Is this a holding pen for people? What's the sort of place on the continuum there?
Yeah, there aren't any over expectations. The folks running this are pretty explicit in telling me that this is primarily just a space for people to get a safe night's sleep. It's called safes. The Salvation Army itself doesn't offer any services like medical or housing placement or job, training. There are no caseworkers here. Staff said that sometimes city outreach workers meet people out front of the shelter to ask if they need anything. And those are folks who are more caseworkery. They have access to, getting on a housing list or getting into other services. I didn't see any of them when I was there, either, at the night or in the morning. Staff also directed me to a bulletin board where there are some phone numbers and addresses for food pantries, stuff like that. But it's very much a one-stop shop where the expectation is that you come in, you don't, cause much of a scene, and you leave in the morning.
And you talked to a number of people that were using the shelter. What is the sense you got? How do they hear about it? What brought them there? Mm-hmm. What are they looking for in the service? Is it just the sort of rest, let your guard down? What did you hear?
Yeah, to start, it's always important to mention that everyone arrives at homelessness in different ways, right? Often it's one thing that went sideways in their life that sent them into a spiral, like losing a job, a spouse, unexpected health problems. And that was the case for most of the women I spoke with, all different paths, but there was a common thread, and that was that most of these women have been struggling for a while. I talked to a woman in her late 60s who'd been homeless for 20 years in Portland, and had just kind of accepted that is where she's going to be. A lot of these folks were over the age of 50. A lot of them appeared to have some kind of long-term physical or mental health challenges, and so many seemed really, lost the motivation to get help and get out of that system or get out of that cycle. They're beat down, they're exhausted. I spoke with a woman named Maureen Schlosser inside the shelter as she was getting settled for the night, and she's in her 50s, has lived outside on and off for a few years, and said the process to leave homelessness behind just had really worn her down. Here she is chatting with me. Just a disclosure, it's a bit of a noisy room, so it might be tricky to hear.
There's a lot of waiting because everything is a waiting list, and so you get confused. You put your name on 50 waiting lists, and then somebody calls you back. I'm from, like TPI. I was calling about such and such place, but then you just heard TPI, and so you call, and then, I don't know. It's easy to get lost.
And just for context, TBI is the name of a nonprofit that gets people into transitional housing. But anyway, I heard a similar sentiment from a lot of people there who are on countless waiting lists for help, but, maybe they keep losing their phone or losing their ID, and there's one thing that just keeps them, one step forward, two steps back, kind of, and getting lost in the system, and it's draining.
Well, but clearly they are people that are interested in at least some connection to the system because they are the people that are here. I assume there are many people that are not interested or are seeking out these shelters at night. You did something else, though. You talked to people as they were lining up and going into the shelter, and then you went back at the crack of dawn, I think, to chat with people as they were leaving. They had just had their night in this night-only shelter. What did that look like? What did you hear from them?
Yeah. I hung out outside the shelter around 5:45 a.m. To catch people as they were leaving. People were given coffee and tea. They kind of streamed out slowly. A lot of them seemed kind of hurried to get to the next spot or to get out of the neighborhood. I talked to a few people. I'll say that few seemed well rested and told me that they had really gotten a good night's sleep. One said she got 2 hours of sleep, and that was actually good because people were pretty noisy and maybe talking to themselves at night, and she was just kind of antsy that her stuff was going to get stolen, just not totally able to relax. I'll note that it's still pitch black outside now when these women have to leave. And one woman came up to me and said she doesn't really feel safe walking around that neighborhood at the hour, and actually asked if she could just stand and chat with me for a while until the sun came up, and she did. But it is, it's a bit of a dicier neighborhood downtown. It's not a place that a lot of these women say they normally hang out either. And so being out front that early in the morning for some is a little uncomfortable.
It also just seems a little odd that they are kicking people out so early in the morning when not a lot is going on. And at this time of year, it's still dark. There has been criticism and questions about this approach by Wilson, right? And one of them is that you're not solving much. I mean, maybe people aren't outside at night, which is probably a good thing. But after that, at 5:45 a.m., they don't have anywhere to go. They're just going to be putting up, their belongings at some corner on the street. Did you get a sense? I mean, where were people headed as you were talking to them that morning?
Yeah, I learned some of these people, their days are pretty packed. I talked to Alex, the woman who we heard from earlier, who said she liked the shelter, and she broke this very detailed schedule based on when certain services are open. Like 8 a.m. free breakfast at one place, 8:30, a shower at somewhere else. 9, I have to get to the storage facility to drop off or pick up my stuff that I couldn't bring into the shelter the night before, and then 10 and go to a day shelter to get help with some paperwork, whatever. These places are spread over town, so she's walking kind of all over the place. And it's no wonder that she and others, I think, are kind of exhausted by the end of the day sometimes, if that's kind of the way that they're scheduling their days. But, some people were ready to start their days. Some weren't. I saw one woman leave the shelter, cross the street, lay down a blanket on a sidewalk, and just fall back asleep. And not to editorialize too much here, but I think anyone would see that woman and say, this is unsheltered homelessness still. This is still what this looks like in our city.
Right. And notable that these people haven't slept in the place that is set up for them to sleep.
Sure.
Not ideal. But, so this is what one night looks like in one shelter of this system that the mayor is trying to open. How many more has Mayor Wilson opened since he started? How many more do we expect before December? Or what does the timeline look like?
So there are 5 total right now. This one opened actually in January, so it's been kind of the longest running. When the last one opened, I think it was last month, the city told me they need up to 8 more shelters to meet the mayor's December goal, which is, 8 shelters in 2 months. It's a pretty wild pace considering that they got 5 in, 8 months or so. I know there's one that's in the works that I know of, hasn't been made public yet, but a number of them have also been planned and then kind of, something went wrong, and so they weren't able to kind of go forward with it. So I'd be surprised to see 8 pop up in the next couple of months. We'll see. You asked me how many more we expect. I don't know if I can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it is probably a kind phrasing to say that feels like a heavy lift, given we know the difficulties of setting these things up. And it feels more heavy probably because of some news that we learned this week, which is that the mayor is just now revealing, by the way, I was counting on $11 million from the state that didn't show up. So that's an issue.
Yep. Yeah. Earlier this week, the city administrator's office sent a memo out to city councilors saying, the current year budget for all of these shelters is short $11 million. And that's because some money the mayor had expected they'd get from the state, didn't come to pass. And Dirk, you know more than me, the state has its own money issues, and it wasn't able to pass all of these funding packages in the last session. So now city leaders are scrambling to figure out how to fill this gap, and it'll probably mean cuts to the system that could push the mayor further away from his goal. I will know, and you were the first to call this out yesterday, that the lack of state money is something the city knew about in June when the session wrapped up, right? That the top executives have known about it for 3 months, but only shared it this week because councilors asked about it. And now it's kind of on councilors. They're going to be the ones who get to figure out how to balance or rebalance the budget next month during their upcoming talk. So it's
Isn't it something like 15 or 17% of the funding that was being counted out, something along those lines, right? It's just very strange to me that you get a funding hole like that 3 months ago and are just, by the way, talking about it publicly now.
And it's, should be stated, it's only one part of the city budget that is currently unbalanced. That there was a whole other chunk of money that the city was expecting coming in from some tax revenues that isn't showing up. And so there's a number of these holes now that we have to patch. And I would, I assume that some city councilors wish they could have known about this as early as possible to start thinking about it. So, it's an interesting cycle.
So the mayor, I would say that night shelters are the big ticket of the mayor's plan. At least that's how it seems to me. It is not the only thing he is doing. Mm-hmm. You have taken a look also recently at how the city is now treating RVs, what that looks like. Tell us about this approach.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, Wilson counts people living in RVs as unsheltered as well. At the same time, also old RVs have become a bit of an environmental threat and hazard in Portland. They leak oil, sewage. They're extremely flammable. It's become also a regular complaint by neighbors and public safety officers alike that, hey, this is not something we really want sitting here. So to address this, Wilson is making it harder for people who live in RVs to retrieve them. For years, when the city would tow someone's RV, they'd allow people to come back and pick it up at the tow yard for free if they came within a month. And now anyone has to pay a fee of more than $300-ish to get an RV back, which for a lot of people, that means no more RV, which, yes, these can be super dangerous vehicles and a mess. But for some people, it's the only thing they have keeping them from sleeping on the sidewalk. They can close the door. They can keep their property safe. They can stay dry. Wilson believes that upping the cost will be the incentive needed to get people to leave their RV behind and move into shelter. But for folks, it can feel kind of like apples to oranges. An RV is way closer to feeling like you're in your own apartment, than a cot in the middle of a room that's available only at night. So it's a tricky sell, but it's another part of his plan. Yeah, and it's certainly something I'm sure the mayor is hearing from neighbors, other citizens in the city who are tired of RVs proliferating on the roadside, right? We can't let this go without nodding to another thing that we learned this week, which is that, the mayor is taking all these steps to steer people towards shelter, the RVs, and opening these shelters. But it also sounds like he's going to direct the city to step up its anti-camping enforcement. What do we know about that? Yeah, and it's something Wilson has really avoided talking about from the start. But it's clearly, I think, been front and center in his mind the whole time. He's really focused on shelters, but not kind of what happens when we open up enough shelters. So listeners may remember that Portland adopted restrictions on public camping last year, but that they couldn't be enforced until the city had enough, quote, reasonable alternative shelter available. So the city said it wouldn't enforce these penalties until there were enough shelter beds available to meet the city's needs of the homeless population. But yesterday, the mayor's office confirmed that they're going to resume enforcing this policy in November. Right now, there are over 7,000 people living unsheltered in Multnomah County, and There are just over 3,000 shelter beds, and most of them are occupied. It's kind of simple math. There just aren't really enough beds. But I think the catch here is that there are still a number of vacancies each night at these emergency shelters. Like I said, the Salvation Army, less than half. And I think the city is realizing it could argue that, if shelter is available, even if it's not the type of shelter that maybe everyone wants to move into, that they can begin enforcing this policy. I should note, public camping isn't legal right now in Portland. The city essentially puts each site through this assessment calculator and prioritizes removing and sweeping ones that rank the highest. That means if they're close to a school, pose a public health risk, block public access, sidewalk, there's criminal activity there, stuff like that. And the city kind of posts a warning at all of these sites saying, between 3 and 10 days, we're going to come through and clean up your site. What's different here is that no one is being penalized. No one's, their stuff's just kind of being taken away. What will change once the city's camping ban is enforced is that anyone who camps on public property when shelter beds are available can be fined $100 or be sentenced to up to a week in jail. So that's what's coming in November.
And that will bring its own problems and questions, I'm sure. I mean, you're right. I think people that have talked about Wilson's plan, at least that I've talked to, have always said, the quiet part is that this enforcement is coming. He can do it and say that he'd taken all measures. So we will see what that looks like when it happens, I guess, beginning here very shortly. Not a fun subject, but an important one, Alex. And, thanks for taking a look at what this all looks like, kicking the tires on it. And thanks for coming here today.
Thanks for having me.
This week's episode of OPB Politics Now was recorded live in the Gert Boyle studio. It was produced by Andrew Thien, and our audio engineer is Naleen Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. In these uncertain times, we are certain that you have questions about local politics. Maybe we can answer them. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at opbpoliticsnow@opb.org. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting, as always, at opb.org. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.